I don't even remember any of this. The last thing I remember was I was just like dancing and having a good time and drinking tequila shots. But I ruined the whole party of like 200 people or something. So after that, when I had a clear mind and we were going back to the shore, I said, I'm calling my agency and I'm going back to Paris. And I said, I'm never touching another drink again. And I actually never touched another drink again.
That was Nikki DuBose, and this is the SHAIR Podcast.
It's time for the SHAIR Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host,
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the SHAIR Podcast. And today we have Nikki DuBose joining us on the show, and she is the author of Washed Away, From Darkness to Light. Her book is a memoir that recounts her experiences as a model as she overcomes more than 17 years of battling with child sexual victimization, eating disorders, psychosis, alcoholism, drugs, depression, suicide attempts, body dysmorphic disorder, and various other mental health issues, all while trying to navigate through the dark side of the fashion industry. It's an epic story where we go into sex addiction, food addiction, and drug addiction. But before we dive into Nikki's story, let's start off with our daily reading. And here's one I found that was very appropriate, especially for this episode. Hardships, February 1st. We felt different. Only after surrender are we able to overcome the alienation of addiction. But you don't understand. We sputtered, trying to cover up. I'm different. I've really got it rough. We use these lines over and over in our active addiction, either trying to escape the consequences of our actions or avoid following the rules that apply to everyone else. We may have cried them at our first meeting. So many of us felt different or unique. As addicts, we can use almost anything to alienate ourselves. But there's no excuse for missing out on recovery. Nothing that can make us ineligible for the program. Not a life-threatening illness, not poverty, not anything. There are thousands of addicts who have found recovery despite the real hardships they've faced. Through working the program, their spiritual awareness has grown, in spite of, or perhaps in response to, those hardships. Our individual circumstances and differences are irrelevant when it comes to recovery. By letting go of our uniqueness and surrendering to this simple way of life, we're bound to find that we feel a part of something. And feeling a part of something gives us the strength to walk through life, hardships and all. Just for today, I will let go of uniqueness and embrace the principles of recovery I have in common with so many others. My hardships do not excuse me from recovery. Rather, they draw me into it. My name is Omar, and I'm an addict, and today's reading is another amazing reading. I can't tell you how many times I've shared at a meeting that recovery is easy when everything is going fantastic, when things are going well at work, when things are going well in your relationship, in your marriage, with your girlfriend, with your kids. When life in general is going smooth, then it's easy to be grateful and it's easy to work a good program, make meetings. But the real test of your recovery comes when hardships present themselves. And it's so true. It's so true. My recovery has been tested on many occasions. One of the toughest was when my dad was sick and dying of cirrhosis, and it was a year-long battle before he passed away. And the last 6 months I spent with him, taking him back and forth to the hospital, being in the hospital with him, and his mental state diminished on a daily basis. And towards the end, we wondered if he even knew that we were there. And it was so hard. It was so difficult. And I wanted to use every single day just to numb it out. Leaving the hospital, all I could think about was how good it would feel to have a drink or, to smoke some weed, anything to disconnect from the reality of what was going on in my life. But instead, I went to a meeting. Instead, I reached out to the addicts in my recovery circle, and it made all the difference in the world. Being able to share with my friends openly, to cry openly, and to deal with these hardships together was the only way that I made it. By myself, I would have made the wrong decision. But with the help of all of my recovery network, I made it. And Nikki's story is no different. It's just a series of hardships where you ask yourself, is it worth it to stay clean? Is it worth it to walk through this pain? Or is it better to just do what I've always done and numb it out? And I can tell you without question, without a doubt, that working through it and using your recovery network and your program, the foundation that you've built through working a program, is the only thing that will get you through those hardships. Clean. HP, baby. Thanks for letting me share. So now let's dive into Nikki's story. But first, if you have not yet rated and reviewed the SHAIR podcast, please, one of the best ways to help support the show is to go to iTunes, leave us a 5-star rating and a review, and that helps catapult us up the ratings on iTunes, which will make it easier for more and more people to find the SHAIR podcast. Now, in the past, many of you have asked, how can I help support the show? Well, I'm going to keep it simple for you. First, I want to thank the people who have sent us donations via PayPal. There are a few of you that still continuously send donations on a monthly basis, but we can always use more. So on a weekly basis, I have over 5,000 listeners every week who listen to the SHAIR podcast. So if 100 of you guys would send me $5 a month, that would completely support the show from beginning to end. So for those of you who have the wherewithal to send me $5 either PayPal or by Patreon, then please feel free to do so. We could really use the support. Also, when you're purchasing stuff on Amazon, there are those of you that are still clicking on the Amazon link on the SHAIR podcast website before doing their purchases on Amazon. But again, there are thousands of you listening. If each and every one of you could just remember to go to the SHAIR website, click on the Amazon button before you do your shopping, that is also going to make a tremendous difference for us financially. So I haven't been one to emphasize it in the past, right? But now we've got a solid listener base. I know you guys love the show. I know you guys get a lot out of it. There are those of you, just like in the meetings, that are newcomers. The money's tight. Keep listening. The show will always be for free. The SHAIR podcast private accountability group will always be for free. But for those of you who can, kick in a couple of bucks. Help us out here. And not to forget the SHAIR podcast private accountability group. Again, it's growing like crazy. Guys, go to the SHAIR podcast, www.theshairpodcast. Click on the button that says join the Facebook private group. For those of you that are in the private accountability group, you know how vital and important that has become. There's over 1,500 members in there. If you don't want to go to meetings, if you have problems connecting with people, if you need something more than just the podcasts and are not ready to cross over into meetings or some other structured program, then the private accountability group is perfect for you. Jump in there, make comments, ask questions, or just read the posts. There are so many people out there that have the same questions that you have. All you have to do is just read those and then read all the follow-up answers and responses that come. And make sure to subscribe to my weekly newsletter so you know every single time a brand new episode is launched. And of course, if you have any questions, just email me, at theshairpodcast.com, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. So now a quick message from our sponsors, and then on to the show. Sober Nation is the largest online recovery community and treatment resource center. They provide treatment resources to those struggling with addiction, as well as to the family members who are caught in the crossfire. On top of that, Sober Nation is a huge community of good people who share their experience with each other. They have informative content, recovery and addiction news, as well as an entire clothing line which helps expand the culture of recovery. They can easily be found at www.sobernation.com. Sober Nation is putting recovery on the map. Hey, Nikki, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Omar. Wait, I call you O. You're my O, always and forever. Thanks for having me on the show today.
I'm leaving that in, just so you know.
Yes. I'm like queen of the screw up. Just so everybody knows, I'm the queen of the screw up.
This is great. Oh, man. We're off to a great start. So, folks, today we have Nikki DuBose joining us on the SHAIR podcast. And Nikki is a former model turned author, speaker, and mental health advocate. Her debut memoir, Washed Away from Darkness to Light, was released September 30th, 2016. In Washed Away, Nikki recounts her experiences navigating the dark side of the modeling industry while battling abuse, addiction, and various mental health issues. She recently appeared in the Oprah Winfrey Network on the T.D. Jakes show to speak about her recovery from body
dysmorphic disorder.
From body dysmorphic disorder and eating disorders. And there's a lot of ands in there.
It goes on and on and on and on.
And how the pressure to fit into the modeling industry nearly killed her. Man, did I somehow get that right in there, Nikki?
Yeah, you did. You did an excellent job. Just imagine living through that. So if it's hard to say it, just imagine going through it. You don't want to go through that.
All right, let's dive right in here. So first of all, Nikki, tell us a little bit about what your normal daily routine looks like, including recovery.
Well, it looks a lot different than it used to, and I try to remember to give all the glory to God, to pray when I wake up, because in the morning my mind is like mush, it's unreliable, right? My thoughts are kind of all over the place. Last year I was diagnosed with major depression and psychosis, which kind of helps me to understand better why my mind is the way it is, why it is all over the place, and why it tends to be negative a lot of times. So it's really important for me in the morning to focus on something positive and to get out a recovery book. I have a book called the Life Recovery Book, Bible and Workbook. So I try to do something 12-step based, or just get a positive book that is, like a meditation book centered on spirituality and something to remind me that God loves me. Try to meditate on Bible verses, something that's going to help me get my mind focused in the right direction for the day. Because if I don't do that, and there have been times when I don't do that, I end up in a really bad mood, or, doing things that are like my old self, and it's usually not a good result,
No, I hear you. Now, I want to touch on that real quick, because one of my questions that I normally ask our listeners is, how do you maintain your spiritual condition, that conscious contact with a higher power? And you seem to have a strong connection with your higher power. So is there something more that you do to maintain that spirituality?
So first of all, before I go into that, I would say so there's no such thing as a perfect person, right? And I think that like people reach out to me and they're like, wow, you're so amazing. You seem to have like it all figured out, but I absolutely don't have it all figured out. It's just because I wrote a book about, or, like I'm post things, I absolutely don't. And there's no such thing as a perfect person. I don't have it figured out. And God knows that, and he loves me regardless. That's what I do know. I'm just trying to do the best I can. I do get really depressed. I do screw up constantly, maybe even more than I did in my past, but I try to remember that when I screw up and when I am having these dark moments, that I have someone to reach out to. I have my higher power, which for me is God. And before I make a big major oops, I now know that I can stop. I can reach out to God. I can pray, and I can open my Bible and I can find a verse that is, in accordance with what I'm struggling with, or I can reach out to a mentor, someone who's there for me, and I have that person, so I think that prayer, meditation, stopping before I act on an impulse is super important.
Beautiful. That is great. And yeah, I always ask this question because there's a big confusion, especially in early recovery, in reference to religion and spirituality.
Yeah.
And for many of us, for many years, that's been convoluted, and one does not exist without the other. And in my life, and for many of us, my life exists in spirituality, devoid of any sort of religious practice. That's just me.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to, I want to know, as far as your drugs and alcohol clean date, how much clean time do you have, and when is your anniversary date?
Well, that I don't know the exact date, but I do know that it was November of 2011. And I know that because I almost destroyed an entire yacht. And because of that, I will never forget that as long as I live. I think I got an entire ship mad at me, and they about kicked me off the ship. So that's the day that I said no more to drugs and alcohol. And that was November of 2011.
Well, I can't wait to hear the rest of that story. But first, tell us a little bit about the first time you drank or used drugs. And more importantly, how did they make you feel that first time?
I started drinking when I was 13. My mom, again, this relationship that I had with my mother, it was very, we like mirrored each other a lot. So my mom, this is important to understand also, my mother had bipolar disorder and dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder. And so there was a history there between my mom and I of physical and sexual abuse. And so my mom and I started to go out downtown together, and she would take me out with her to bars. And I remember having, that's when I started to drink. And I was already, engaging in my eating disorders. By that time, I had already had an eating disorder for 5 years, which is really heavy for...
Yeah, dude, seriously.
But the thing is that, I think as with any child who is, engaging in any sort of disordered behavior, when you start doing that at an early age, it becomes your normal. So you don't realize the seriousness and the deep psychological, physical, emotional impact that it's having on you. So I didn't understand, what was really going on. And again, because your parents are supposed to provide and take care of you, so whatever's going on in your environment, you accept that as healthy and normal, let's say. Even if you really do understand on some level that this is not good, you don't really know how else to get out and provide for yourself, so you just accept it. Yeah, so I was going out, I was drinking, and it really pissed me off because I hated my mom for what she was doing. Like, she was married, to someone that I didn't have a good relationship with because he was physically abusing her, he was physically abusing me. But yeah, he was providing a really nice life for us. He was sending me and my brother to private school. However, I was seeing that she was cheating on him. There was a lot of open promiscuity in our house. But when she would take me to downtown, I think that drinking was a way for me to kind of let go and release that. And also because my mom was doing it, I was like, well, what else am I going to do? So that was my first kind of
introduction.
Yeah, introduction to alcohol.
Heavy, man. Whew, okay. Well, listen, it's time for you to get started. I'm going to just turn this show over to you, Nikki. I mean, you're warmed up times 10. I want it all. So, folks, we're going to have a real treat today because Nikki's got every conceivable addiction under her belt. So we're going to kind of weave it all in there together. So what I want you to do, Nikki, is I want you to share your story with us. The battle with all your addictions, the wreckage it caused in your life, when you hit rock bottom, and then finally your journey into recovery up until today. So, Nikki, take it away.
Okay. Well, so if you want me to start back to when I was a child, parents divorced when I was 2. My dad went to jail, and then my mother remarried. Again, like I said, my mother married someone who was physically abused. Then I was sexually abused by a male figure. I wasn't allowed to see my dad that much when I was growing up. And then, so I lived with my mother and my stepfather, and there was a lot of domestic violence and physical abuse. However, like I was saying, because he worked hard, made a lot of money, I went to a private school. And I think because of that, the way things appeared on the outside versus what was really going on in our house. I was kind of bred to be an overachiever in school. So having that perfectionist tendency and feeling like I didn't have an outlet to, say what was really going on, being bred with a lot of fear and shame, which happens a lot with child abuse, sexual abuse, and eating disorders. That's what really, I would say, lit the fire for all of that. So that just really continued, until I was in my teens. And all of the abuse and everything really just became worse, and it kind of came to an head. The other thing was that in my house, there was that continued child abuse and child sexual abuse. My mother was, I didn't realize that I was being sexually abused by my mom because it was, my normal. My mother was also sleeping around with, they were swingers. So there was like constantly people coming over to our house, like younger boys, like probably college age and then even younger. And I didn't realize. So I was like dealing with a lot of really heavy things, and I didn't understand all of this. I do now, now that I've reached out and I work with Peaceful Hearts Foundation, because we help survivors of child sexual abuse, but at the time I didn't understand any of this. So my mother was dealing with a lot with her dissociative identity, when you have a parent that has that, they have different personalities that'll come through. So it's really hard for them to take care of you and provide. Like there were many times when my mom would act like she was jealous of me, or, like she didn't know who I was. And then she wouldn't remember like an hour later. She wouldn't understand.
Right.
So that was really difficult. When I was 13, I was removed by the police from my house because the abuse was so bad. So I was sent to live with my dad, who lived like 30 minutes away. So I had to change all my life. I had to basically like say goodbye to my brother and, everything that I had known, and go to a public school. And I was like extremely introverted. I had my eating disorder that I was dealing with. We know that anytime you change your environment, it really exacerbates disordered behavior, eating disorders, anything like that. Change is not good for someone who's dealing with an eating disorder. I know that it became much worse. I started purging much more every day, but I was trying to hide it from my dad. But that was really difficult because he lived in this really tiny old house in the countryside. So I didn't talk to anyone at school. I didn't reach out, for a while. But I felt like such a loser because I didn't like the way that I looked. I thought I was extremely ugly. At the time, I was dealing with body dysmorphic disorder, which do you know what body dysmorphic disorder is?
It's the first time I've heard of it. So please give us the details on that.
So by the way, if you guys ever want to read a great book about men and BDD, a really good friend of mine, Brian Cuban, who's a brother of Mark Cuban, he wrote an amazing book about body dysmorphic disorder.
What's it called?
Shattered Image.
Okay.
So body dysmorphic disorder is when you take a perceived flaw. Like, most of us, we see something we don't like about ourselves in the mirror, but we can go out on about our day. But BDD is like, when you see something about yourself in the mirror, but you become obsessed with it to the point where you can't even leave your house, or you get a ton of plastic surgery, or, you develop suicidal thoughts about wanting to end your life because you see a distorted image. Some people see a monster in the mirror. I would see a man, or I thought I looked like a man. I thought like I was an animal. Like I thought I wanted to kill myself because I hated the person that I saw in the mirror. And that was directly linked to the sexual abuse that I had. A good percentage, I would say, of the people who have BDD have some sort of trauma in childhood. So I developed this warped perception of myself. I remember I would cry and tell my dad I look like a man. And he was like, "You don't look like a man, fool." We had that kind of relationship. He's like, "What are you talking about?" And he was like, but he thought it was hormones, because
Right.
I was 13 and I was like, "Dad, no, you don't understand." And I also thought it was hormones because it developed into this behavior pattern where I started to self-harm. So I would literally, after school, I would come home and I would lock myself in the bathroom or in the bedroom, and I started to scream and cry because I didn't want to go. He would try to get me to hang out with friends or introduce me to people, and I didn't want to go out. And all I could do was obsessively put tons of makeup on my face and then wipe it off and then dye my hair and, was trying to change myself into something else. And so I started to have really bad temper tantrums to the point where I would literally bang my head against the wall, trying to, instead of cutting myself, I would bash my head in the wall. And I just remember thinking that I wanted to die, and I was trying to kill myself. And still, my dad thought that it was this kind of hormonal thing, that I was having bad temper tantrums. However, this was also around the time that I was having kind of hallucinations and delusions. So I would see shadows. I would see things that weren't there. I would see what I would call ghosts and all sorts of things. And I was hearing voices. I was hearing, like people talking to me in my head. So I was having all of these kind of delusional experiences. And all this was kind of going on at the same time when I hit puberty. So while all this was going on to me and, I wasn't properly dealing with it, I wasn't going to see a therapist. I wasn't doing all that. My mom was, she was committed to a mental institution, a mental facility, because she tried to commit suicide. So basically what I'm trying to say is that my mother's life and my life paralleled a lot. And that's basically how it went for most of my teenage life.
Now, did she have the same body dysmorphic disorder?
I don't know if she had BDD. I do know, though, that she had an eating disorder because I clearly remember hearing her one day throwing up when I lived with her. And that's the day that I actually started throwing up. And that's the day, I remember switching from binge eating to, because I started binge eating when I was 8 years old. And then I started vomiting when I was 10. And I remember her one day so clearly, coming in just to check on her, because she was drinking a lot. And then she was sitting on the toilet with a beer bottle. And then she got mad and she slammed the door in my face. And then I remember running into my room crying, and I heard her vomiting. And I thought, I wonder what that's like. And I did it. And the thing is that with bulimia, it's highly addictive because it actually releases the similar endorphins in your brain as, like drugs. And it becomes like an addiction because you start to need to feel that high over and over again. So as my mother was kind of going through her problems with suicide, I didn't know how to reach out to anyone. So my eating disorder really became like my best friend. And I was doing it, I would say, at least 5 times a day at that point. And my grades really...
Wait a minute. What you're saying is you were purging 5 times a day?
Yeah.
Your throat must have been just thrashed.
Yeah, but the problem is that I had been doing it for so long at that point. When you go through trauma at such a young age, unfortunately, you get used to being not loved, right? Mm-hmm. And you get used to just kind of coasting through life and doing whatever you need to do to survive. It's like your mind gets set on survival mode. I was so used to not having any sort of love for myself or any sort of self-care. I didn't even know what that was. I mean, after 8 years old, I was just like a beast. I didn't understand any of that stuff anymore. I mean, and then the weird thing was that everyone that knew me, no one knew that about me because I looked like I was so good at hiding it. Mm-hmm. People that have eating disorders or other similar disordered behavior, we become master manipulators. But on the inside, I mean, I was completely different person. I knew how to hide it like you wouldn't believe. But when it came to really loving and caring for myself, I didn't know how to do that. I actually thought that loving and caring for myself was going and eating 5,000 calories and then vomiting it in the toilet, and I thought that loving and caring for myself then too, because I started to try to at school, hang out with the popular kids. And of course, all they wanted to do was go out and drink. So then, eventually I was partying again. And then that led to doing drugs for the first time. So I say the first time I did drugs, I was 13 or 14. And I knew marijuana, of course, when I tried it, but then I thought this is a baby drug, I don't want to, it's okay, this is great. But I wanted to I had my first boyfriend and I thought, well, he does acid. I want to do acid. All I could think about was getting as high as I possibly could. I wanted to go all the way. And when I drank, I remember the first party I went to with the kids at school and the popular kids. And I thought, I want to drink more than all the guys here. I want to get as drunk as I possibly can because I want to, and I think in some way it was also about being the winner. I had this really weird competitive attitude with, I don't know who I was competing with, but I don't know. Just the mind of a lonely, repressed soul. I want to be the best. But the best always woke up with this horrible hangover and sick as hell. But then I thought, oh, let's do it again. And let's do it again. And then I started to have blackouts already, but I didn't care. When I was 16, I just decided my self-esteem was already to the floor. And I was like, cause my mom had been committed to the mental institution twice already. And I was like, she tried to kill herself again. And I was like, well, I'm good for nothing. That's basically what I thought. And I was like, what am I going to do? How am I going to survive? Cause I think I felt like life has nothing for me. I felt like I'm just going to kill myself, or either I need to make money and be successful. And I think I felt like I wanted to drop out of school. So I went to this modeling school that was very prominent in my hometown. There's been a few very famous actors that have graduated from there and models. And they're like, yeah, we'll take you. We have runway training classes that are coming up, but it's going to cost you $500. So they measured me, and they, they're like, can you lose some weight, take some inches off, and blah, blah, blah. But just make sure you bring the $500. And I was like, okay. And they're like, can you bring your mom with you? And I'm thinking, shit, no, I can't, because my mom's in the mental institution. What is that? I'm like, I'm not going to fit in with all these other chicks that are going to be here. So I go in there and anyway, so I do the walk and everything. And then the teacher, I swear to God, like, I'm thinking, man, I must really be a fucked up person, because everything I do, like, is different. I feel like a fucking alien. So, like, I go in there, and when all the girls walk and they do everything perfectly, and they're all wearing like these yoga pants and tummy bearing shirts, and they all have like the same body type, and their moms are all staring at me, and like, she lifts up my shirt. I was wearing like bell bottom black pants, a ton of makeup, and like this white collared shirt, and she lifts up my shirt. And, because I had been binge eating and throwing up all the time, your body gets like water weight. Your body's not going to be where it should be. Yeah, because you're bloated. And she lifts up my shirt, and there were like mirrors all around the room. I'm thinking, oh my fucking God, just kill me now. Just kill me, kill me, kill me. And she lifts up my shirt, and she's like, what kind of exercises do you do? And I'm like, dude, I don't exercise. I just eat jelly donuts all day. Because I was working at a bakery with my dad at the time. And she's like, you see their stomachs? And she pointed out the other models. She's like, you need to go home and do exercises. And, you need to have stomachs like theirs if you want to have a chance to be signed by an agency. And I'm thinking, all right, just get me the fuck out of here, because I don't want to model anymore. Like, just get me out of here. This is not for me. So I quit. I was like, that experience of being, zoned out in front of everyone and really being basically bullied. This sort of thing happens all the time in the modeling industry. The day-to-day things that happen in agencies, and just with all these like Craigslist or Model Mayhem or Instagram, sort of a free-for-all in the modeling industry where everyone can sign up and be a model. It's not regulated, and a lot of people can be body shamed and raped or abused. I mean, you really have to be careful. So it was not a good experience, and it just really exacerbated my eating disorders and body dysmorphic disorder. So I quit. However, a few years later, I ended up right back being attracted to that industry because of the sexual trauma in my childhood. And this is something I still to this day, meaning the sexual trauma in my childhood, it still has been the greatest challenge for me. So I tried to go to college twice during that time, during those 4 years that I had off, and I failed out because of my eating disorder. Like, I couldn't get a grip on it. I couldn't focus, couldn't study. So I ended up, trying some like random jobs. I was actually a dancer at a club. I had everything. I did everything from like trying to get my real estate license to being a dancer at a club. I mean, it was crazy. I was all over the place. And then I would go on Craigslist. And this is so important for people to understand, because you know how many girls, and guys too, you know how many girls struggle with this? A lot. And they do not talk about this. They would like go on, so I would go on Craigslist, and I would think like, this is all I'm good for. Or I didn't actually consciously think that, but subconsciously, this is what kind of drove me to do this. And I would like think, okay, man, I got to make money really fast because I need to pay my rent.
Now, when we're talking about Craigslist, are we talking about like legit modeling on Craigslist, or are these?
No. This is before I signed my contract. So I'm talking about, and this is what is directly linked to the sexual trauma of my childhood. So this is what happened. So this is before I ever got into professional modeling. So there was this like period of time where I had like seriously no direction, and I was, really traumatized and terrified. And, I was kind of like out there wandering in the nether regions of life, trying to make my way. I had moved out from South Carolina, from Charleston, and I moved out to California. I had gotten married and then divorced in a year's time. And I was like sleeping with probably all of San Diego. Not really, but like, I say that because it's really important for people to understand sometimes how survivors of child sexual abuse can behave. And that was really me for, I would say, a while. And I was really hurting, but, I didn't understand how badly I was hurting. And it was a really extremely painful and dark time of my life. However, I thought that I was like in control. I thought that I was a strong woman. I thought this was great and I don't need anybody in my life. And, and I'll just float around in a cloud all day and I'll just eventually find my way into, a career or something. So, but this happens a lot, with young people that kind of grow up from broken homes and they don't have any direction. Unfortunately, this is extremely dangerous. I was like, what am I going to do to make money? I thought, I can't seem to get through school. I can't seem to find a good job. It's like I tried to get my real estate license. I failed at that. And I didn't understand also that it was in large part because I wasn't going to therapy. I wasn't getting grip of my eating disorder. I was, I had danced at a club. And then I went on Craigslist and I searched the classifieds and I was like, okay, I need to make easy money. Well, yeah, there's a lot of legitimate job listings, but there's also a lot of not legitimate job listings.
Right.
Such as when they used to have the adult section on Craigslist or the gigs section on there. So I was like, how can I make fast cash? Click. Oh, there's amateur modeling. Okay, so let me go on there. And, oh, yeah, you'll pay me $200, $300, $150. Okay. So I had this period where I wrote about this in the book, where I would let the most random, nasty, shady people take pictures of my body parts for money. And then I took the money and sometimes it paid my rent. Sometimes it paid my bills. Most of the time I didn't. Most of the time I took the money and I binged it. I purged it. Or I got drunk. And that's what I did. And then my dad would be like, oh, you got a bill here for your student loans. You're really behind here on your bills. Or my phone would be shut off. And so I was like falling extremely far behind in debt, and I was just wasting my life away as an addict. But I didn't see it that way. We don't see things as they really are because we are blinded by our addictions. Eventually, I moved back home for a little bit and I kind of tried to get my life back together. And then I moved back to California. When I moved back to California, I met a girl who was in the real fashion industry, not in the shady Craigslist photographers. We actually became best friends. And she said, you could really be a real model. And I'm like, what, really? And she's like, because I was like, what? If people just want to see pictures of my boobs and put them, and she's like, no, I'm serious, Nikki. You're really pretty. And I thought, well, like, man, because when I look in the mirror, I just see like a freak, because I had this whole BDD thing going on.
Right.
But I didn't actually tell her that. And so anyway, she introduced me to this girl locally who ran a magazine, and I started to take pictures for this magazine. And then I started to do runway shows, and designers in San Diego would call me, and I would do runway shows. And it really helped my confidence, because I thought for the first time I was actually doing something worthwhile with my life, which is really sad, by the way, but, it was the truth. So I was doing that for a little while. And then I think from that, this manager in Los Angeles who worked in television, he called me, and I moved to Los Angeles, and I started to do TV for a little bit, hosting very, very small stuff like that. Because of that, it helped my confidence a bit. However, at the same time, I got a taste of what the entertainment business was like in the way that, they wanted me to get plastic surgery on my nose, change my nose. Like, you can't work in TV, you can't do movies and stuff like that unless you get a nose job. That was brought up all the time. And so because I wasn't dealing with my mental health issues and going to recovery like I should have been, I didn't deal with the criticism in the right way. Because, like, for example, everyone who works in Hollywood, they all hear that stuff, all the time. But I think maybe if I would have been, going to see a therapist, maybe I could have handled it in a different way. However, I was dealing with it by, like, I would go shoot with crew, and then, like, I would go home and eat, like, an enormous amount of food and then throw it up and then do it again and again and again. Or, I would self-harm or do something horrible. And that's not, you can't have any sort of quality of life like that. And you can die. You can actually die one time purging, I work with the National Eating Disorder Association. I've been working with them for 4 times, and they get, like, an insane amount of calls every day from parents who have lost, their children, their child, or their loved one to an eating disorder. It actually takes one time of purging to die. It's a miracle, that I didn't die.
Well, especially for as long as you were doing it and for how many times a day. It was just, a true addict.
Yeah, a true addict. So I liked doing TV because I actually did have a journalism background from high school. I was doing editorial team in my senior year. And when I was a kid, when I was in 3rd grade, I wrote a book. Like, my first book was a little book. So I liked doing that, but I still wanted to do modeling, but my manager was like, "You're too old to do modeling." So I thought, well, screw you. So I fired him. And then I fired him, and then I sent out my pictures. I had my boyfriend at the time take Polaroids of me, and then we sent them out to a bunch of different agencies. I did get a few responses back from some of the best agencies actually in the world. I was really shocked. But, of course, the requirements were to lose weight. And it's always like that. That's how, because the industry is not regulated. And again, I don't want to say any of this to bash anyone in the modeling industry, because I'm not about that. I think that the industry could be an amazing place to work, but I think that it could be restructured a bit. So it was like, we really want you to come here and work, but you gotta, you need to lose weight. And that's just the way that they control and manage the models, because it's not regulated, because you're an independent contractor and you're not an employee. So they can get away with saying that stuff. So I, at the time, because I had a vulnerable mind, because I wasn't, strong-minded, which mental health issues are not anyone's fault. It's not something you can control. I resorted to overtime. Like, I over-exercised. I think I was like exercising 4 hours a day. But then I started to binge on diet pills. I was like really, really triggered, and I lost the weight and I lost a lot of weight, and I made sure I did it, like a soldier. And then when I went there, I looked different because I had lost a lot of weight. And so I started to work, and the first agency that I signed with, they freaking closed down. Like, they had been in business for 20 years. I did a few jobs, and then they went out of business. So, like, I didn't get any of my money.
Oh, Jesus.
Like,
dude, it just does. It's brutal.
Then so I'm thinking, like, God dang it. But then, so the person who had scouted me was like, "It's okay. I have an agency here that I know for sure they'll take you." And I'm like, "Okay, what agency is that?" So it ended up being a better agency and one of the best agencies. Like, I'm not gonna say the name, but it's, everyone knows this agency and it's one of the best in the world. So I'm like, "Oh yeah, of course I want to go there." I'm thinking like money, fame, stars in my eyes, and I want to be a supermodel. That's all I could think about. I want to be a Victoria's Secret model. The stupid thing that like every girl thinks about. And I was extremely vain and obsessed with being in that league of whatever it means. It doesn't mean anything. I thought, if I sign with this agency, I'm going to be a Victoria's Secret model. And then my whole life is going to make sense and everything is going to be complete. And that's all I was thinking about. You know, I didn't have any education. I wasn't, I didn't understand how much value I had on the inside. So I thought, yeah, let's go. So I went there, and the owner, the director of the agency was like madly flirting with me. You know, he had this casting at his house with like 13 other girls. They did have their moms there. Of course, my mother wasn't there. But this was in Miami, you know, and things were in Miami and the modeling. It's not like in New York. Things are sometimes not done in the way they should be. So it was like at his house, and then he picked the girls he wanted to be at the agency, and then he signed us. And I thought, oh my God, I am a supermodel now. Like, that's what I thought. I literally was like, you know, it's a high you get when you do drugs. That's what I was on. And I haven't done any drugs. I was like, yes, I am amazing. And this was before Instagram or any of that stuff. I really thought I was a shit. And, you know, and the bad thing about that is that when you, and it's kind of like, it was like a workaholic, you know, because when you put your everything into your work and you put all your faith into work and money and success, it is bad because there's no higher power there, right? There's no stability. There's no middle that's going to keep you grounded. And so I put all of my faith and my trust and everything into that, which got me into a lot of trouble because I let my agency, I let my agents, I let, you know, all these people control and abuse me because that's really the way that they manage models. And it's not just me saying that. You can look up, it's many other models who say that. And unfortunately, because I wasn't grounded, because I didn't have that spiritual center, because I wasn't educated, I wasn't balanced, I really let that world control me. Eventually, you know, I did obtain a lot of success, but it came at a very high price. And, you know, I was raped. You know, I would attend these model dinners that they have where like all the models come together, but not all the models, but like whoever is invited. And you do feel this like pressure to attend these dinners because, again, it's not regulated, right? So it's not like at a corporate job where you go, or even at a normal job where you go and you know that you put in your hours and you work with educated people and you do things a certain way. I mean, it's just like a free for all, you know? And so at these dinners, there's older men, there's photographers, and it's kind of like socializing. And there are agencies who have escorted their models out, you know, and it's kind of like, so you go there and you hang out and you know that if you go home with this person, you're probably going to get a better booking so it's just really horrible the way things work. But at the time, I didn't think it was horrible because of my background, of the way I was raised, the way I was brought up. So that's kind of like all I had known. And even if, yes, on an intellectual level, I knew, I was also a product of trauma. So because I hadn't been through any sort of recovery yet, I think I was just doing the best with what I had at the time, you know? And I think that's what we're all doing, you know, we all do the best with what we have. However, you know, there was a time where I was invited to a lunch at the director's house, and I was told that it was going to be a casting, you know. However, when I got there, it was not a casting, and it was just the photographer there with the director and his girlfriend. And by the time I left, much later that evening, I realized that I had been raped. So there are very dangerous situations that can happen. There was a lot of sexual harassment. It was like every single day that I was told that I wasn't good enough and I need to constantly lose weight, or then it was like I was too thin. You know, you are like literally when you go to a shoot and you see your images, there were some times when the photographers, who were also my friends too, would like laugh and tell me, oh, like, okay, now we're gonna take this picture and we're gonna put you on a diet, or, you know, let's take about 20 pounds off of you. And they would like, so I think that when you are, you know, even for a person who might not have mental health issues, it probably would reduce your self-esteem a bit. But even if you are, you know, dealing with mental health issues and, you know, I didn't realize the severity of my mental health issues, it really had a huge impact on me. By the time, so I eventually left that agency because of the sexual abuse issues that happened. And I moved to New York and I started to work. And New York was really hard just because of the fashion industry up there. It's very tough. And my weight, it was always kind of came back to my weight because I was a healthier look. And at that time, I think that was like 2010, 2011, and the business is always changing. And they just didn't like my size. They wanted like a super, 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 super thin girl. And I also got pregnant. And I didn't know I was pregnant. It's like the never ending saga. And I didn't know I was pregnant. So like what happened is I went to the doctor and, so this is what happened. So I noticed that I was gaining weight. My agency said, you're gaining weight all over. So my agency at that time had also told my mother that, they had heard that I was throwing up. So it had been brought up to the attention that they said, if you don't go to recovery, we're going to drop you from our agency. So my mom said, you need to go to therapy. So for the very first time, I actually did go to therapy in 2010. So what happened is I was seeing a therapist who was very good, by the way. And I was, I also went to 12-step for the first time then.
And this was for the food disorder.
This was for the food disorder. Okay,
so they knew that you were purging and they needed you to straighten that out.
Yeah, and it was helping me a lot.
Okay.
And it was like a Overeaters Anonymous, that sort of thing.
Right.
But it was helping me a lot. And I also, at that time, went to a psychiatrist. I was getting on medication for bulimia. Actually, what I take is anticonvulsants, which strangely, interestingly, helps for bulimia. However, as soon as I started to see the therapist, I was like started to gain weight. And I thought it was because like I was trying to start to eat, and get on a healthy schedule because I was sober. I was sober for purging. So I told my agency, well, maybe it's just because of that. And my therapist said, why don't you go see a gynecologist, just to kind of get checked out. And I thought, I don't want to do that because someone who's been sexually traumatized, it's like the worst thing, we never want to go to the gynecologist.
Right.
And I
yeah,
thought,
totally.
No.
Yeah.
And then she's like, no, this will be the best thing ever for you. Trust me, this is a huge step in recovery. And I'm like, okay, waving a little recovery flag in my heart. And I'm like, okay. And so I go to the gynecologist and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, Nikki, this is great for you. You're like making a huge stride in your life, like one step at a time. So I go back in there and this doctor starts flirting with me.
Oh, Jesus.
And he goes like, oh, you're a model. I can see that. And I'm thinking like, what the hell did you just say, motherfucker? And he's like, sorry for my language. But as a person who's been traumatized, like that's the last thing you want to say. You want to feel safe and comforted in the doctor's office.
Did you actually say that?
No, but I'm thinking that.
Okay. Because that would have been really a strong step.
Yeah,
but I would have said it's a positive. I would have said positive. You know what I mean? Like you're standing up for yourself.
Well, let me tell you something. Now, if he does that, I'm like Medea. You know who Medea said this? Because I'm going to tell you something. If you mess with me now, I will straight up smack you to the other side of the room. And I will call you back. You don't want to mess with me now. But at the time, I was like really timid, So I made it in there. That was a big step for me. But he hoists me up in the chair. And he like, there was a nurse in there, but you have your like legs up in the air and you're just like in a very weird position. And he like, starts examining me and everything. And then he's like, oh, we need to bring the ultrasound machine. And I'm thinking like, why do you need to bring the ultrasound machine? And he's like, well, you may have some cysts in there. And I'm like, oh, yeah, well, maybe so because my mom had a problem with this or whatever. And then he's like, well, no, it's not cysts. And I'm like, oh, thank God. And he's like, oh no, but you're pregnant. And I'm what the? Oh my God. I'm like, I have made it now. I'm officially fucked on my life.
Oh my God.
But that wasn't such a bad thing. I was 25. I mean, I was like older.
Right.
And I'm like, what the heck? Who? Okay, what? And so,
so that's the thought? The first thought was who?
I can't believe I just said that.
You just said that. And I was like, okay, so, ooh.
No,
so
I mean,
who?
I knew who it was. I knew who it was, but I'm just kind of talking as I go here. But yeah, I know I knew who it was. And it happened to be, someone that I didn't want to be with. It was an abusive person in a relationship that I explain this in the book. It was an abusive person that I was seeing who was a good friend of the director of the agency that I had just left in Miami. So I was not making good relationship decisions at that time. Again, everything was a product of not dealing with the sexual trauma in my child. So make a very long story short, in the end, I consulted with my mother, who, was like, you need to have the child. I consulted with my agency, and my agency was like pushing abortion. And I, in the end, decided to have an abortion. Did I want to have an abortion? No, I did not want to have an abortion. I felt pressured in that particular time by my career and by my mental illness, to tell you the truth. Like, I was not in a very good place in my mind. And after that happened, I lost a lot of weight, like a lot of weight. It actually triggered my addiction, and I started to abuse laxatives. However, after that happened, my agency, the same agency who had like persuaded me to have an abortion, they actually dropped me from my contract and didn't even tell me.
Oh, Jesus.
Which happens all the time. So I actually went to Europe. I started to model, and because I was so skinny, my weight was like fluctuating a bit. So I like started to travel all over the world at that time. Was modeling, and some places they would turn me down, like Paris, they hated me. Israel, they didn't like me. Spain, they loved me. And so I was working there a lot. My grandmother and my mom, they were getting very sick. My grandmother died. When my grandmother died, I dealt with the grief by, I think I just stopped eating. And that was in 2012, the beginning of 2012. And so when that happened, I started to work more, and all of the agencies were calling me more, and my career started to climb higher than ever, in Europe at least. And I developed anorexia though, so I probably got down to, I don't want to say a specific number, but it wasn't in the triple digits; it was in the double digits.
Oh man.
Yeah, and but the thing is that because the modeling industry isn't educated about mental health, at least not currently, they're pushing me, and they're like, you look amazing. No, but really. And the same agency in Paris who had told me, we don't want you here, they were calling my agency in Spain. They're like, oh, they actually at first they didn't recognize me from my pictures. They're like, who is that? And they're like, that's Nikki. And they're like, no, that's not Nikki, Then they're like, can you send her back to come work? But I was so, like, in private, I was only allowing myself to eat. Like, I had this weird, like, it's not weird, but sometimes with anorexia, what can occur is like OCD. So I had my mind, like I was hearing those voices again, that occur with psychosis. And the voices were telling me, like, you can only eat red apples. So, like, I was only allowing myself to carry around red apples and, like, nothing else, no matter where I was working. So I was starving myself. I was still taking my medication for the bulimia, but, like, sometimes I would binge and purge that, too. Like, I was doing really weird things. My hair was falling out. I was vomiting blood. But I thought that I looked, amazing. So, like, the BDD had me in such a way where the thinner that I was, I would say the better I looked.
In your own mind.
Yeah, in my own mind. But still, like, for example, when I would see pictures of myself, I could only see
the imperfections,
the fat, like, on myself. Even though it literally would just be a bone, I could still only point out the fat. And it got to a point where my mother became extremely sick with the alcoholism, because she had at that point been an alcoholic probably, since I was a kid. But after her adopted mother, my grandmother, had passed away, she kind of fell off the wagon, and she would go off missing for, in the woods, like literally would like run away from home. And the police would like find her. And I think it was also, her bipolar and dissociative identity disorder flaring up. So she would go missing, and like, I'm in another country working, and I get these like Skype calls from her boyfriend telling me, like, we can't find your mom. And I'm thinking, okay, and I'm trying to deal with this stress. Or I get a call like, your mom's been in a car accident. Like she would go, like she was really super alcoholic. Like she would get in the car drunk and go flip her car and then leave it in the ditch and like hitch a ride with a stranger and then come home and say, no, I haven't been drinking. Like she would completely deny that the car, that she had just gotten in a car accident. I knew that I had to do something about my mom's, what was going on with her. I mean, now I understand that, you can't really do something for someone when they're having an addiction. But at the time I didn't understand that. But I was also really suffering, with my own health.
And this is 2012.
This is 2012. My career was going better than ever. And I was thinking like, yeah, I'm going to move back to New York. I wanted to sign with like the biggest agency in New York, and I was thinking about that VS contract and all this stuff, At the same time, like my mom was having this huge problem and I was having a problem, but I really didn't see the depth of my problem. So when they were calling me about my mom, I knew I had to do something. And so I consulted with my family, with my dad and my brother. And we decided that we needed to have an intervention. So I flew back home and we had the intervention with her. When I saw my mom, because before that I hadn't seen her in, I'd say, a year and a half. And when I saw her, I literally didn't recognize my mom because I guess it was due to all the binge drinking. She, at the time when I saw her, she was living in a house with an enabler, and she like stumbled out with no shoes on, like a dirty shirt, and her hair was all messed up. And I'm thinking, and because when I was a kid, like, and my mom was so beautiful, she was actually a very, very beautiful woman. And I always admired my mom when I was a kid. When I saw her, I realized, oh my God. And at that moment, I don't know what happened to me, but it was really shocking. She stumbled out. She didn't recognize me. And we got her and we took her to, my brother and I took her. And that was a big ordeal anyways, because she was living in a house with a guy who had a gun, So my brother and I had to like strategically remove her from the house. We took her to this hotel and we were able to get her to a safe place. And she did finally. I mean, it took a really long time and like a lot of just discussion and trying to negotiate with her for her to realize that she needed help. So we did get her detoxed to the hospital. And after like 2 days, they kicked her out of the hospital because she didn't have insurance. And then she did agree to go to this place. My brother and I paid for her to go to this amazing, these people are amazing. Not the facility is amazing, but just the people. This place called Ashley Hope in Charleston. So I spent about 2 weeks with her. And I say the 2 weeks that I spent with her was the best I've ever had in my life because she was finally sobering up.
Right.
She was there for 60 days. What was weird was that, like, when I was in Spain, when I was in Europe, I started to have, like, these hallucinations again. And my mom's boyfriend was also telling me that my mother was too. Like, she was seeing these weird shadows again and stuff like that. And people with bipolar disorder, they have that. But we were both seeing that. One day I had this, like, really weird, I still don't know if it was hallucination or if it was real, but I had this like vision of a Grim Reaper, and I heard a voice telling me that my mom was going to die. The next day, I got a phone call that my mom had left the facility, and 2 weeks later, my mom died.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, it was really weird. She died, due to binging and drinking with her enabler. They got in the car, drunk driving accident. So when my mom passed away, it really was the turning point for me. And I do want to quickly reference that. Yeah, when I was modeling in Europe, I was using drugs a lot. I was doing cocaine. I was doing a lot, and probably more than ever, ecstasy, everything. I mean, everything. And so when my mom died, I really woke up, but I had to choose to wake up, because I probably had 50,000 rock bottoms. And so, I mean, really, I was constantly on this shit floor. And I can't even tell you how many people have reached out to me and they're like, you were a shit show. So it's what was it about that made me finally decide to get better? I think that it just, I never expected for that to happen. Although my mom really was sick for a really long time, it just woke me up, and I just never expected that to happen. And I realized at that moment, because when she went to the sober house, they gave me a AA book, and I started to read it a little bit by little bit, and I realized that I'm really in a big mess here. And I just believe that sometimes, God allows things to happen that can be for our good, but we have to choose for it to be for our good, And unfortunately, like the book is called Darkness to Light. So unfortunately, my mother's darkness was my light. And I made that step to get better, to get healthier, because when I saw my mom lying in the casket, it literally scared the piss out of me. And I was like, I do not want to be in that casket,
Right.
My mom. But if I don't make the decision to get better, I'm going to be like that really soon. So I've been sober for 5 years, and I've been free, thank God, from an eating disorder for almost 4 years. I've never been, free and clean from eating disorder for that long ever in my life. So I'm just living my life one day at a time.
When you have all these different, I guess what they would call a dual diagnosis, it's this roller coaster ride of what do I use next? And you're using them all as coping mechanisms to overcome another one, but it's one dysfunctional behavior trying to overcome another one.
Yeah.
So in the end, it was your mother passing away that ultimately helped you. That was your rock bottom.
Yeah, which also, though, when my mom passed away, it set me on the path to say I need to get help. And when I decided to get help, I ended up moving back to the U.S. I did end up getting in a very healthy relationship for the first time, and that also helped me to take time off. I ended up leaving the modeling industry, which was a huge, huge trigger at that time in my life, for everything that I was going through. So I got into a 12-step program for the food. I had a mentor who was extremely crucial. So I am all for, getting a mentor, a good person in your life. It didn't cost me anything. I had a mentor who worked with me for about 2 years. She worked with me through the Life Recovery Bible and workbook, which I highly recommend, because what that did for me was it kind of highlighted all the things in my life that could be out of balance, And I was like out of balance in work. I was out of balance in sexual addiction. I was out of balance in drugs and alcohol and the food, in the way I perceived myself. I had very low self-esteem and just in everything, and I needed that spiritual balance. So at first it started with the food, but once I got a mentor, someone who would take the time with me every day and really instilled that spirituality back into me, that spirituality became my confidence and helped me to tackle all the different areas of my life that really needed to be tackled. But still to this day, of course, that's something that, I have to make the effort. I have to be responsible for, working through every single day. It's not just like you go and you're like, okay, now I'm done. Now I can go. You have to work on it
every day. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
And so you worked your steps through OA?
I go back to this Life Recovery Bible, which is a 12-step program. However, the different 12-step programs that I'll go to a meeting, let's say, would be OA, would be SL, sex and love addicts. Yeah, those are the two. And then AA. Those are the three main.
Those are still part of your lifestyle today, which is,
yes.
You need which makes sense.
Yes.
So the 2011 rock bottom, what was that bottom that you hit to come off of the drugs and alcohol?
Yeah, so I had a boyfriend at the time who was a very prominent person. So he his lifestyle mixed in with my own lifestyle of being, a model and traveling all over the place. We were really, afforded everything you could imagine. So we were on a trip around the southern coast of Italy, and his friends had a yacht, a big yacht. We had a chef on the yacht, and the very first second I stepped onto there, they introduced me to the chef, and I'm like thinking, oh yes, this is amazing because I can have whatever I want. Right. So I started to I snuck into my room and waited till they were out there on the sun deck or whatever, and I ordered a lot of food, and I think it was the first thing I did basically was binge and purge, and I thought that I could hide it. I thought they could, of course, how could I think they couldn't smell the vomit, But when you are sick, you don't think about these things. Right. And so I would do that constantly, however, not realizing that they were probably noticing and probably getting very pissed off about it. And the other thing was that we were partying all the time, pulling into all these different ports, partying a lot. And partying with celebrities and partying with, dignitaries and these crazy, crazy, crazy parties. But out of all the people at these parties, who do you think was the craziest one?
You were.
Yeah. Ding, ding, ding. So I was the one, I'm talking, let's think politicians that, really dignified people or supposedly dignified people. And I'm sitting there in my, I don't know how much it cost dress. And I get up on the table with probably my 10th martini, and I start screaming. And that's all I remember. And then the security guard carries me out. Ugh. And I do that after and at first it's funny. Everyone thinks it's funny. Oh, do you remember last night when you did that? And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's funny, isn't it? But then what happened is that the last night, apparently I got so plastered that I completely destroyed, I literally destroyed the ship, vomiting everywhere. And then I started to assault my boyfriend and called him an abuser. And so I was turning against people because I was so drunk to the point, to where I became the attacker, and I was vomiting everywhere, and ruining everything. And they ruined the whole party. So all I remember is being on the floor at some point on the ship and having 10 people hovering over me and they were yelling at me. And they were telling me, I want her off of my ship. And I'm scared. I'm and then I black out. And then the next day I'm thinking oh my God, what did I actually do? And I'm thinking what is wrong with me? I can't believe, why can't I just be normal? Why can't I just, I remember thinking why can't I just be someone else had a girlfriend on there and she was so pretty and perfect looking, and I'm thinking why can't I just eat a normal meal and enjoy a nice glass of champagne and just be normal? Why do I have to get on here and eat a whole refrigerator? Why do I have to be the freak? I remember always feeling I was a freak, and I couldn't manage or control anything in my life. And now I felt oh my God, everybody knows my secrets, and now everybody's gonna tell. And it's gonna be the whole topic of conversation, and I'm just a fuck up. That's what I. And the next morning, they're you need to get out. You need to get off because you threw up everywhere. You were telling so-and-so, that he abused you, that he's an abuser. You were cursing at everybody. I'm thinking oh my God, how could one person have caused so many problems? I don't even remember any of this. The last thing I remember was I was just dancing and having a good time and drinking tequila shots. But I ruined the whole party of 200 people or something. So after that, when I had a clear mind and we were going back to the shore, I said, I'm calling my agency and I'm going back to Paris. And I said, I'm never touching another drink again. And I actually never touched another drink again.
Wow. So that one you almost did straight up.
I will never forget that because it embarrassed me, shamed me, and it traumatized me so bad. I will never forget being on the floor of that ship and having all these people standing on top of me screaming at me you're a bitch, you fucking bitch, you ruined my party. It really, really, because also then everybody knew about what I had done and knew all my secrets. Right. Imagine everybody knows. So I realized that this whole facade, this whole mask that I put on, it was out in the open, and I thought, oh my God, I gotta get help right now. Oh my Could I clean that up? So, yeah, I never touched another drink or drug again.
Wow. It's just amazing. It's the craziness, the absolute craziness. So then the book, when did you start writing the book?
I started writing the book about 2 years ago. It took me about 2 years. Yeah.
Okay, so then this is 2 years into your recovery from the food addiction, from your, I guess you would call it food addiction.
Yeah, and it really helped me to continue to stay on the straight and narrow.
Okay, so then what was your recovery journey like in those first couple of years?
It was all over the place, because recovery is really not a straight line from anything, especially eating disorders. Because I had the eating disorder since I was 8 years old, I had no idea how to eat. So coming from a perspective of, at that time, a 27-year-old woman who was just learning how to eat, I didn't understand anything about food. I actually had, a bit of OCD. So when I would think about food, I had those voices telling me, you can't touch that. Don't touch that. Don't do that. It got to the point where I would even have to put food on certain plates or eat with certain silverware, which can be common with anorexia recovery and things like that. So the very first time I ate or put anything in my body without doing any sort of behaviors, I had to go get a juice. And I remember at the time, my boyfriend was with me because I did home care, which means I stayed at home and recovered. I went and got a green juice, a healthy juice. Started very small with that. And I remember thinking actually that my head was going to explode, something, which is combined with OCD. So I thought that if I drink this juice, something terrible is going to happen to me. But I drank it and I hid in the bathroom. I hid in the bathroom because I didn't understand. And I was I was 27 at the time. Imagine, and I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I started crying, but nothing happened, nothing bad happened. I'm still here. My head's still intact and nothing bad happened. I got through it and the world didn't end, So, but I started with that and then I worked through a plan with my mentor. I dealt with the underlying issues with a therapist and a mentor and the spiritual aspects, which really helped. I would also write positive notes and put them on the mirror, things like that. Say I'm worthy, I'm special, all these sort of things. To help build up my self-esteem at the same time that I was tackling the underlying issues. Forgiveness was a big part of that. I wrote out letters to other people, to my past, and I forgave myself.
You made amends.
Yeah, I made amends. I actually met up with some of the people from my past and I told them I was sorry because I didn't realize how my behavior was affecting other people. At the same time that I sent out a letter to, for example, I sent out a letter to my stepfather, but then at the same time, I asked him for forgiveness, which sounds so weird to people, will never understand, but it does make sense because it's a two-sided coin, when you are, even when you are traumatized, yes, that's not right, but at the same time, when you also become an addict, your life greatly affects people and you don't realize how it affects people. So it's for you, it helps you to let go of the pain that causes you to continue to hurt yourself, which is really important in the healing process. So that really helps me to stop the behaviors, and it helped me to grow and to heal. So with the food, it was very much baby steps, and it was a lot of 1 step forward and 2 steps back. I went from juices to solid foods. And at the same time, I became educated about healthy food, and just about food in general, and eventually got into an intuitive eating cycle, I think. With exercising, because I was also a compulsive exerciser, I just learned that I didn't need to be on any sort of exercise schedule, that I just needed to treat my body. I just needed to treat myself with care and love and just do whatever I wanted to do because it was good for me, not because someone else told me to be a certain way. So I don't have any restrictions on food. I just eat whatever I want it's more an intuitive thing. And I really believe that the body will just tell you what it wants to eat. But as far as for food, I really just enjoy food and I don't worry about it too much anymore.
No, it doesn't sound like it. And then, of course, the underlying sexual trauma and the sexual abuse. Did you work through that? Because sometimes working one program, especially since the eating was such a big factor, working the steps through those or working with a mentor also helps you work through all the other issues. For example, like the sexual trauma. Were you able to work through that program, or was it a different program?
Yeah, so I recently just did a podcast with the Mental Illness Happy Hour. Do you know that podcast?
Yep.
And that's hasn't been out yet. We did a heavy, super detailed into sexual addiction. For me, that really has been my biggest challenge, and that's so hard for me to say because again, there's that fear and that shame attached to that. But it's good that I am honest and transparent about that. Working with Peaceful Hearts Foundation, helping survivors of child sexual abuse, I'd say one of the biggest challenges for survivors is being open and honest and not having that shame. That's my mission, is to help survivors not have that shame. My goal, my resolution for the end of this year going into next year and all for next year is to be more into sex and love, Addicts Anonymous, so that I can get a really strong grip on recovery. I think because I worked so hard on getting the eating disorder under control, the eating disorder had a huge grip on my life for over 17 years. So now that I really feel that I have a good grip on that, I want to get a good grip on the sex and love, Addicts Anonymous, because it does. It really has an influence in my life, and I don't want it to. I feel like there's always got to be something that has an influence on our life, and definitely that's still something that I do have a challenge with, and I want to get a grip on that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Nikki, we have been on this interview for an hour and a half. So we're going to start to close down because it's true. There was a lot.
Yeah.
But it's one of these things where the story is the story, right? The story is the story. And for some, there's not as much. And for some, there's just so many aspects of it that you almost have to go into each and every one to get the full picture. So I'm glad you did. There's so many takeaways from this, the sex aspect of it, the modeling aspect of it, the drug abuse aspect of it. It's all combined into one. And the good news is that you can recover, but you can't do it alone. You didn't do it alone.
No.
We didn't do it alone. We need support. We absolutely need support.
Absolutely. You can't do it alone. The great thing about it is I do believe you can fully recover, and there's always someone out there who wants to help you. All you have to do is reach out. So I hope you can, take that step and reach out if you're struggling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's close down. I'm going to ask you 5 questions about your early recovery, and I want you to respond with inspiring answers you can share with our newcomers. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So number 1, what was keeping you from getting clean or staying clean when you first got introduced to recovery?
I'd say what was keeping me from getting clean when I first got introduced to recovery was just the fear, and the shame, and also my ego, pride. Pride is a big thing, and ego is a big thing, and also because it was all I had ever known, from staying clean. It was all I had ever known. It was my lifestyle, so I felt comfortable. I felt like my best friend versus recovery being my best friend. Yeah,
it's so foreign. It's so different. What's going to happen when I have to make like big changes in my life? Big fear in there. Yeah, absolutely. All right. So number 2, at what point did you have a spiritual awakening, that aha moment in recovery when you accepted that you were powerless over your addictions, but for the first time had developed the hope that you could recover?
Yeah, definitely when I had that first spiritual awakening, it was in 2010, the first time when I decided to go to recover, when I did go to 12-step program. Even though I did have a relapse after that, I will tell you that I did have that hope that I could recover when I went to my first meeting, and I saw the hope in other people's eyes, and they offered that hope to me. And I did get a sponsor for a bit. I did feel the presence of God in my life, and I was thirsty for that. I was actually hungry for that. I was more hungry for God in my life than I was for drugs, alcohol, for binging, purging.
I think that based on just what we've learned, or what I've learned over the years, is that we're all seeking that connection with God or the higher power, whatever form or shape it takes in our lives. That's what we're seeking. And we're constantly trying to fill it with external things, when the reality is, we are all just seeking that spiritual connection, whether or not we know it or admit it or want to admit it or want to live in denial about it. Once you get to where we're at, without it, we're basically hopeless.
But absolutely, 100%, I know I'm absolutely nothing without God, who is my higher power. I'm absolutely nothing. And if you want to, he's proven it to me 50,000 times, because I've been on the bottom 50,000 times. So I know that I am nothing without him.
Yep, absolutely. So now you had mentioned a few books. So my third question is, do you have a favorite book? I'm going to say for you, do you have a few favorite books that you would recommend to our newcomers that you read in early recovery, or that you would recommend in general?
Well, there's a lot of great books. I would say for guys, like I mentioned before, and really for girls too, but definitely from a guy's perspective on body dysmorphic disorder, there's Shattered Image by Brian Cuban. Great book. Also, it's about eating disorders from a male's perspective, depression. I read a really good book super early in recovery, 2010, I think, called When Food is Love by Janine Roth. It just kind of explores, the relationship aspect, in your body. And also as a friend of mine, Jenny Schaefer, she's written really few good books. Almost Anorexic. You might want to check her out.
Okay, and then of course your book.
Yes, of course, my book, Washed Away from Darkness to Light. If you don't go check out my book, I will come and hunt you down. And I will hang you by your toe, just like my grandma used to say, on the clothesline. And trust me when I say that, because I'm really freaky, man. I'm just joking. And that's one way to get your book sales high up on Amazon.
Right?
No, and a really good book from a friend of mine. She's a friend of mine, from Susie Faber Hamilton. She was an Olympic runner. She has bipolar disorder. She was an escort. So her book is about that. She might want to interview her too. She's amazing. Her brother committed suicide. She was on the New York Times bestsellers list. So she had bipolar disorder. She was an escort, and she was an Olympic runner. Her book is called Fast Girl. It's an amazing book. So I highly recommend that.
These are great suggestions. I'm actually very interested in the last one you brought. I'm going to have to check that out.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the best way for our listeners to reach out to you, find you? Do you have a website?
I do. It's nikkidubose.com. You can find me on Twitter, tweet at me. It's at the Nikki DuBose. Also on Facebook, it's at the Nikki DuBose. My Instagram is at the Nikki DuBose. What about that? They all three match.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Just don't tweet anything mean at me, or else I will still come and hang you by your toes. Not really. I welcome the negative comments. I like them. I get a lot of them. I like them. It makes it interesting. But, you can, I like talking to people, so you can come and chat with me. I like it.
Okay. And two more questions for you. The fourth question is, what is the best suggestion you have ever received? I always, when I'm in my darkest moments, and I really do get dark, I always go back to thinking what friends of mine say, never ever give up. Because I think that it's when we are sitting and we're sad and we feel like we want to give up, just knowing that not giving up, it really makes a big difference. Sorry, that's my dog. And he's right there telling you never give up. So he's confirming that. So I will tell you, no matter what it seems like life is not worth living, don't ever give up on yourself, because you are worth more. You are worth all the love in the world. And tomorrow is another day, and it's worth a chance, to make it good. So don't ever give up on yourself. Beautiful, beautiful. And if you could give our newcomers only one suggestion, what would that be?
There's a lot of them. I think that, if you're feeling like you don't know, like you're in that dark place and you don't know what to do, I would say just start by Just start by, either writing down what you're feeling, because writing was an extremely healing tool for me. So just start by writing out your feelings, or start by reaching out to someone. In some way, shape, or form, communication is a highly effective tool. So either by writing or reaching out to someone, nobody's going to think that you're weird. They're there to love you. They're there to help you. And from there, it's going to open up a path of healing. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Beautiful, beautiful. Great suggestions, Nikki. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, O. I remembered. I get an A+.
All right. So, folks, we have now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida.
Thank you for joining us on the SHAIR Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview, or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.theshairpodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then. The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker.